All right, Al, you should be good to go. You can
Okay.
go ahead and unmute or go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's get started.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, everybody's muted, so you're good.
Okay. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Eric for the opportunity to represent this clinic. I've got about 45 slides. I assume, Eric, we want to try to be done by 1:45, at the most 10 to the hour, and then leave some time for questions.
That sounds good.
Okay. And feel free to let me know if we get down a rabbit trail or we're falling behind here. Very good. I see we've got a lot of familiar names online here, a few who've seen this presentation before. As I've noted, I presented it at the SIG Meet in the January of 2016, and also at our SoCal Ops event in June of 2018. So this clinic is the journey of First 808, a timetable and train order primer. So, and I assume you're seeing my screen?
Not yet, to see you.
Really? I said I was sharing my screen. Okay. Let me see. Okay,
All right,
good.
good to go.
All right. Are you seeing my, never mind here. Let me minimize the thumbnail here. Okay.
Yeah, I see your presenter view, so you should be good.
Okay. All right. So briefly, let me go over the outline. I'll talk about what the goals are and what my approach is for this clinic. There's some maps, timetable, and some rules. And then I won't go through all of this, but really this is following the journey of a train that I was the road crew on. So it's kind of a view from the cab, as it were. And we'll use this as an opportunity to touch on some timetable and train order subjects. So overall, if anyone on board is I guess would consider themselves an apprentice, hopefully what we do is encourage those folks to become a road crew member on a basic layout that's operating under timetable and train order, or maybe develop a basic timetable and train order operating scheme for an existing layout. If you're more advanced, let's say a journeyman to model railroading, to delve a little more into timetable train order, become a road crew member on a complex or prototypical timetable and train order layout, volunteer for an operator or a dispatcher position on a timetable and train order layout, or modify or build a layout designed for enhanced timetable and train order. So that's what we're asking for our journeymen. And for our master model railroaders and timetable and train order experts, and I know there's folks on here that have forgotten more about the subject than I know, be kind, have mercy on this clinician here. And I'm looking to learn something from this presentation too. So we'll appreciate any comments or questions. So the overall approach here is to highlight, I would call, some basic and maybe some intermediate aspects of timetable and train order using the actual journey of a train. This is the first 808, or 1-808, first 808, over the La Mesa Club's Tehachapi Pass layout that had a hopefully interesting run. And this is back on in November of 2015. So this was my first time operating timetable and train order at La Mesa, and this was the second day running there. So I'd like to think I've gotten a little better than what you'll see here, but we'll see. We're always looking to improve. We'll also show some of the layout schematics and some general diagrams. I also took some pictures. I wasn't planning to do a clinic beforehand. This just happened afterwards, but I did take some pictures of the train and some of the paperwork. So hopefully that will better illustrate the points I'm trying to make here. And just would like to again thank the La Mesa Club for the opportunity to operate down there. It is very likely the finest timetable and train order layout in the country, and likely the world. You know, it's a huge layout. You know, I've heard different sizes, but it's something like 65 feet by 120 feet. And, you know, the attention to prototype detail make it both extremely interesting and potentially very challenging as far as a place to operate. Okay, so why use this particular example? Again, the size, distances, and the prototypical practices at the La Mesa Tehachapi layout, they provide, you know, examples of some basic situations that you might find on most timetable train order layouts. Hopefully that should be of interest to the beginners. And then there are some examples of some intermediate or maybe even advanced situations, which hopefully are of interest to those with moderate or extensive experience. So, you know, I'm trying to cover a broad topic here. So some things might be a little rudimentary, and some of the topics may go over some other people's heads if they're not that familiar with it. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. So this particular train included what I think some basic and some intermediate situations all rolled up into one journey. As I said, making it what I think is a convenient clinic basis. And as I indicated, there's copies of some actual diagrams, schematics, orders, register pages, and then coupled with some photos. I did not include any videos, but hopefully that will bring this journey alive. So what I'm hoping to convey is you're in my shoes as I go through this journey, and you know, what would you do in this in these particular situations? So for those folks that are not familiar with the part of the world, I guess, that this layout models, this is from the La Mesa Club's paperwork, I guess. And I assume, Eric, I know you're the only one that's not muted here. Are you seeing my cursor?
Yep.
Okay. So, you know, we're looking, you know, north, west is to the left, east is to the right. This is the joint line, Santa Fe and Southern Pacific, in central Southern California. Kern Junction or Bakersfield. This is where this train began its journey. It went through, and you'll see the names of some of these locations as we go through. There is a double track up to this location in Bina. From that point on is when it gets especially interesting. This is single track with a series of sidings: Caliente, Allard, Bealville, Cliff, Rowan, Woodford, Waylong, Marcel, Cable, and then at Tehachapi is where the double track ends, and the single track ends, sorry, and the double track begins again on its way all the way down to Mojave. So you're going to see this diagram a couple times through the clinic, and hopefully it provides a good "you are here" perspective, both in terms of where the train is and maybe some of the orders that I received at this point. And in most cases, I've highlighted this particular train in green, and then when we see some other trains, they're going to show up in red. Okay, so this is a copy of I guess, the schedule portion of the employee timetable that is relevant for this journey. And as I just touched on in the geographic view, this is the station or the timetable view. And again, here from the top to the bottom here, you're going to see the same names here: Bakersfield, Kern Junction, Caliente, Bealville, Woodford, Cable, Marcel, etc., heading down. Now, my particular train even is east, so 808 is an eastward train. And here it is on the timetable. I've got it noted in green. Now, we were starting at the La Mesa Club runs in real time. So a 12-hour operating session run 1-to-1 clock. So we were at 8 o'clock p.m. is when the session started. And then what I've also noted on here are some other trains in this rough time window. This journey will take 3 or 4 real hours to occur. So in looking, what other trains coming up are we going to need to worry about, both in terms of the superior by class passenger and mail type trains that are running in the same direction, and then in the opposing direction, in the westward direction, what other trains did we encounter? And what I've noted here is in solid, these are trains that should have already completed their run based on the fact that it's 8 p.m., but we have to verify that. And then these ones in the dashed ovals are trains that have not departed yet, but we're going to have to worry about them during our journey. So I've got in here, and I'm assuming Eric will post this clinic on the website. So I'm not going to go through all of these. This is more as a reference, but these are some of the key operating rules that we'll encounter. A train is superior to another by right, class, or direction. We're going to run into trains of different classes and going in different directions. The main track must not be occupied without authority. This was an older copy that I had as far as the timetables being fulfilled. I think they're actually 12 hours now, I think. So a train still has, a regular train still has timetable authority for 12 hours relative to the timetable. If a train's going to be overtaken, it needs to flag by Rule 99. Again, not planning to go through all of these in detail, but this is part of what you need to know to operate a timetable train order. Okay, and then we'll also encounter some orders, both the regular trains such as first 808 and the extra trains. So these are just the Form A fixed meeting point for opposing trains. Number 51, engine so-and-so meet number 4 at a particular location. Giving right over an opposing train. This engine has right over another train from one station to another. We'll run into that. Time orders. A regular train or an extra train has to wait at a certain station until a certain time, or in other cases, it'll either be more specific time for at a specific time for a specific train. And then extras are created through a Form G. And just one note at the La Mesa Club follows the Southern Pacific practice. So the eastward trains, freight trains, are typically regular trains, third class trains, and they run in multiple sections. The westward freights are almost exclusively run as extras, and we'll see that in the example coming up. Eric, just as a quick time check, a lot of material to cover. Pace okay, you think?
You're fine.
Okay. All right, so here's a picture of the departure. So this is at the La Mesa Club. This is the Southern Pacific Bakersfield Yard. This area off on the right is Kern Junction, where the Santa Fe Railroad comes in and joins the so-called joint line. And here's a picture of the train. This was a unit beet train, sugar beet train that we were running. And here we are looking eastward. And again, showing on the map where we are, we're at Kern Junction here. And then here's looking in the other direction. Again, here's where our operator is located. And then here's the rear of the train. And we have a helper on this train. We had an ABBA set of power on the head end. And then we have a cab forward that is helping us push, go over the grade. So this is where we came and picked up our train at Bakersfield, Kern Junction. So prior to our journey, what are some of the things before we even turn the knob and move? We got a train assignment from the crew caller. They said, okay, who's up next? Okay, you're the head end crew on first 808. We received a train call sheet or soup ticket, which has some additional information. We'll go over that coming up. We then received our initial clearance, and that clearance noted that we had multiple orders. We did have a helper crew, so we needed to review those orders with the helper crew. Needed to check the timetable for those westward opposing regular trains. We touched on that a little bit when we showed the sample of the timetable. Check the timetable for the eastward regular trains to make sure we don't get overtaken by a superior train. Check the Kern Junction register for the arrival of the westward and departure of eastward superior regular trains. Check the Kern Junction register for the arrival of westward extra trains that head right over our section. Again, we should also have had note in there if any of them had arrived. Wait for the arrival of those superior trains, and then when we're ready to depart, fill out that Kern Junction register. So a fair amount to do before we even think about moving the train. So here's an example at the time of this soup ticket or a call sheet. You can see what train we were. These are the engines that we had. Here's my name as the lead engineer. Here is my helper crew, where I'm leaving from, where my ultimate destination was, and then some special instructions. We'll come back to this, but we had to pick up 17 cars at Caliente. So our 42 car train here was going to become longer once we did that work at Caliente. Then we got our orders. And again, with the helper crew, we wanted to go over these. So here's the orders to first 808. We had 3 orders, 45, 49, and 51. Interestingly, this first order came from this operator named Daumann. So he was actually at the end of the last trick. He was the operator in that section. So we'll see here we have there are 2 westward extras that have right over first 808, 42, 44, and a Santa Fe train right over us from Tehachapi to Bena. And we'll show that schematically where that is. Then in the middle section, another extra right over, we have another right over order. And this one has a time order associated with it for where this train's going to wait. And then a third train that has right over us, and it has wait times as well. So we're going to get into these in a little bit more detail. So I'm trying to show this schematically. So here we are as first 808. We're still at Kern Junction. We're going to head all the way over here to Mojave. And now we were told about these 2 extras that have right over us the whole way from Tehachapi, basically all the way to Kern Junction or Bena. Then we have another order, but this one has a right over and a wait. So it has to wait both at Woodford and Caliente, and that will allow us to advance against that train. So that was another order that the dispatcher gave us. And then finally, here's a third order. This is, and you notice we've got a mix of Santa Fe and Southern Pacific trains, and that has right over us from, again, the whole single track section, and it has wait orders again at Woodford and Caliente. So a fairly, for a beginner, this is a lot to digest, but again, this is a very prototypical, busy mainline area of the country that's being modeled. So if you've not done timetable train order and a lot of other layouts, it's not as complex as this. If you are fairly well versed, it's just wonderful to be able to get these very prototypical type orders in this situation. Okay, moving on. So now we're going to go and check the register. So this is the register at Kern Junction. The eastward part of the register is on the left-hand page, and the westward part is on the right-hand page. So we're looking down here. These are all trains that have gone earlier. You see this started at 2 a.m. Train 60, moving down 6:45, 7, et cetera, from other days. And here we are at coming down in the evening. Here are some of these trains that I highlighted. Train 24, that has arrived. 52 has arrived, and then train number 4. Sorry, I take that back. Those have all departed. Those have departed prior to us coming on duty. So we don't have to worry about those coming up behind us. And then on the right-hand side, these are the opposing westward trains. So here's trains that we're worrying about. The second section of 23, first 51, second 51, third 51, and number 7. Those have all arrived. And then here are 2 extra trains with right over us that have arrived. So based on all of that, we're almost ready to go. So then we have to actually enter ourselves. We start a new page here, and we're noting ourselves here. You know, we came on duty at 8 o'clock. It's 8:46. So we've waited about 45 minutes to depart. It's not bad. You know, we've gone through, reviewed this, checked the register, and now we're on duty, and we're good to go. So we've signed the register and start wheels turning. So here's a picture of our train. We've just come around the corner from that yard that I showed the picture earlier. And the thing that I noted after I had done this was, since I took these pictures, it had a timestamp on them. So I kind of knew where I was at the time, and I could go back, you know, to make this clinic and see where I was at the time. So I've just come around the corner. I'm approaching this area at Magundon at 8:52. So, you know, not quite 10 minutes from when we left. All right, so now we're at Magundon, and you know, we're still on the double track, and then we have to go down and go through to go to Bina, and then eventually to Caliente. So we're gonna check the timetable. Okay, there's no superior trains to meet or be overtaken by. We checked that on the register. Check the orders. Well, let's see, that order 45 is fulfilled. 6244 West and the Santa Fe 170 West, they've arrived at Kern Junction prior to our departure. Looks like order 49 was fulfilled. Also, it arrived at Kern Junction. It's kind of odd. The dispatcher gave us 2 right over orders for the same train. Oh, well, it's arrived. So, you know, no big deal. Okay, we're good to proceed through Bina on to Illman and then on to Caliente to do our work. Or so we think. Okay, so a funny thing happened on the way to Caliente. The time is between 9:05 and 9:10. We're approaching Caliente, you know, and we look up because we can see in that area, and there's a westward train coming down the hill right at us. I wasn't expecting anybody to come at me. Who could this train possibly be? Let's see what this turns out to be. All right, so disaster avoided barely at Caliente. As I said, what's that westward train coming down the hill at Allard? Let's double check the timetable. Number 56, number 57, they're not due at Caliente till after 10 p.m. Let's double check those orders. Okay, let's see. Order 45 is fulfilled. Yep, extra 6244 West and Santa Fe ATSF 170 West. They've arrived at Kern Junction prior to our departure. Let's see, order 49. Oh, wait a minute. That's not 6244. That's 6224. Uh-oh. So we left double track, and we assumed that both of those orders were fulfilled, but they were not. Order is not a second right over for 6244. Never assume the dispatcher made a mistake. That was a different train. So the beginning of a long stay at Caliente. Okay, order 49 is now fulfilled from First 808's perspective as 6224 departs. Gee, that crew, why are they giving us a one finger wave as they go by us? I wonder maybe if they're upset that we were there and they weren't expecting us. So let's look at the time. It's 9:20. Let's triple check those orders since we've screwed up once already. This third order, Santa Fe 226 L West, has right over us. He can't leave Woodford until 9:25. The timetable shows it takes about 17 minutes of travel time to go from Woodford to Caliente. So, and then he can't leave until 10:10. he won't likely be at Caliente until 9:42 p.m. at the earliest. We should still flag the main while we pick up the 17 cars, because we'll likely still be working when Santa Fe 2226 L West arrives. And while we were there, another Westward Extra with right over orders. Okay, that's the one that we had, that order 51. So before we start our work, we got another order, number 53, because a Caliente is a train order office, and we got an order there. Meet order with a new Westward Extra at Woodford. Extra engines 4287 run extra Tehachapi to Current Junction, and meet first 808 at Woodford. Okay. So now we have a so-called hard meet at Woodford. So let's see, the switch list says we need to pick up 17 cars at Caliente. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So now, so let's see, let's go look and see more problems at Caliente. Train length. Okay, we picked up 17 cars. We're now non-clearing at Caliente. We were originally 42 cars. We picked up 17. Now we've got 59 cars. Well, this part of the timetable tells us both the eastward and westward sidings only can handle a 45 car train. Uh-oh, now what are we going to do? Another complication, we lost our crew, a helper crew. Our helper crew died on the law. They were reassigned. So now we got to go over all the orders all over again with a new helper crew. We also got an opportunity to change our underwear after that close call with the 6224 West. And while we're doing that, extra Santa Fe 62, 226L West approaches Caliente. Okay, so here's a little bit of a you are there. So this is Caliente here. This is the operator going back this way and looping back around, takes us all the way back to Kern Junction. Here's our train on the eastward siding. The main track is here. There's another station siding there, and this westward extra is doing the right thing. He's pulling into the siding here at Caliente. And this is where we are on our journey. More problems with the train length. So the first thing we need to do is we have to clear the east switch on the main at Caliente at the backside to make sure so that the Santa Fe Extra can clear the east switch. But if we're clearing the front end, now we're blocking 226L West to leave because of our train length. And while we're dealing with all of this, here comes number 57, a first class passenger train. He doesn't have a required stop at Caliente. So here's 808 occupying the eastward siding. Here's 226L West occupying the westward siding. And I'm still fouling that eastward switch. Okay, so now we got more challenges. Well, we're in the inferior bidirection first class number 56 has a soft meet, a timetable meet with number 57 at Illman, which is just behind us at 10:10. And then a 10:14 departure out of Caliente. Now here, on this railroad, westward trains are superior to trains of the same class in the opposite direction. So this superior by direction number 57 is due out of Caliente at 10:07 p.m. and he needs to be at Illman here. So now we've got 4 trains that we're dealing with at Caliente. So what happened here? Well, here comes number 57. So we both the Santa Fe westward and first 808, we cleared up to allow him to come into the station. Then we moved forward to clear the rear of the train. Then 57 departed. and then now he's departing, and at least he's out of our hair doing this saw by, and this is 10:19 to 10:17 is when we're at time wise. All right, so we performed our saw by, and now we're sticking out here, and we stayed out there because we knew 56 was coming. So we had to pull forward to let 56 come in. Then once he's arrived, we had to back up again to let him out. And finally, he could leave because the Santa Fe extra was waiting for 56 to arrive, but he's got to wait until we let him leave. So now we've backed up again. Now 56 can finally leave. Now we're getting into 10:24, 10:26. All right, so we're at Caliente. We've done all this shuffling around. Is it okay to proceed to Woodford? Well, let's check the timetable. It's about 10:35 p.m. Our departure time, and typically these third class eastward extras run late. Okay, that has passed. We've got no superior trains to meet or be passed. 56 and 57 are gone. Let's check our orders. 49 is fulfilled. 6224 West arrived at Caliente. Order 51 was fulfilled. That's Santa Fe extra. Finally, we let him leave out of Caliente. And now that new order that we've got for order 53 to meet the superior westward extra, we have the so-called hard meet at Woodford. That's still in effect. All right. Okay to proceed from Caliente through Allard, Bealville, Cliff, and Rowan, and on to Woodford. So here we are. We're finally leaving. Lovely looking train. Here's some of the reefer, some of the other cars we picked up. Here's our head end climbing out of Caliente. Here's our helper. So again, we met 6224, not 6244 West. We picked up 17 cars. We had a meet. We saw-byed number 57 and number 56. When you delay a passenger train, in some vernacular, that's called stabbing the varnish. So we did a double stab of the varnish. We slowed down 2 passenger trains. So we're off to a great start here. And now we're departing at 10:37, you know, after about an hour and a half. All right, so some considerations on the way to Woodford. We need to determine our estimated arrival time at Woodford. Our Caliente departure time was 10:37 p.m. The employee timetable says it's about a 23-minute trip to go from Caliente to Woodford. We go and look at this. Obviously, we're running very late here, but the delta should be about the same. 17 to 40 is 23 minutes. What else do we have to worry about? Oh, we've got another passenger train, first class opposing passenger train that we have to worry about. Well, he doesn't even leave till 11:20. We're going to be at Woodford here, so we shouldn't have to worry about him. Looks like we should get to Woodford by about 11:04. That order will be fulfilled, etc. So we get our way up to Woodford, and now we have more orders. Okay, so we got another order at Woodford. Order 57, meet extra 5235 West at Waylong. Times 105. Number 59 is not due in Waylong until 11:40. We've got plenty of time. Again, here's this order here after the arrival of that train, run extra, and we got a copy of that order. So, okay, so we should be good to go here. All right, so we're letting you see again more of this fantastic scenery and these large tracks, layout, etc. at the La Mesa Club here. Well, here's this extra. It's a very short little train. Here it was on the siding at Waylong, and he was waiting for us. So here's first 808. We're proceeding through Waylong. We've left Woodford, which is behind us to the right. We're heading up this way. Now we've progressed down here. We're still in the middle of this single track with these multiple sidings. And time check, it's about 11:13 p.m. All right, let's see. Can first 808 make it to double track at Tehachapi? All right, let's see. Our estimated arrival time at Tehachapi, Waylong departure time is 11:13 p.m. Employee timetable says it's about a 15-minute trip. Here's Waylong at 8:47, 15 minutes to get to Tehachapi. Rule 86, clear the main track not less than 2 minutes before the leaving time of the opposing superior train. So now we have to go over to the right-hand side of the timetable. We look at the times for number 59. Looks like we've got plenty of time. He departs Tehachapi at 11:32. There's a 4-minute difference. We've got 2 minutes to spare in terms of making it to Tehachapi. We did note there's 2 sidings in between, but we should be good. So if we wait at Waylong, only 7 minutes margin. So let's go, right? What could go wrong? Okay, a funny thing happened on the way to double track, and this was between 11:15 and 11:20. There was new track. This section of the layout at that time had just been completed. I think this might have been the first session that was using this, and we derailed. We had a derailment on the new track between Waylong and Marcel. Now what? So here's first 808. It's about 11:30. We're at Waylong. Number 59 is about to depart Mojave. Okay, now what do we have to do here? All right, well, it looks like we can't make it to double track. So now we're going to have to pull in somewhere. So where should we meet? Well, Marcel is the next siding. It's got 48 cars. Cable's got 50 cars. Waylong is, and you can see here on the timetable, this has the Waylong's got 65, but we've already left. We really don't have a lot of time to decide on this. So we chose to go to Cable. And in hindsight, that was not a good choice. Marcel would have been much better. There are 2 sidings at Marcel, even though one is for the eastward trains and the other is for the westward train. If we didn't find anyone else there, we could have broken our train into 2, but oh well. So we get first 808 goes in, and now we're fouling the west switch at Cable. We flagged, deploying a flagman at the east switch, and we proceed slowly, prepared to stop. As it turns out, we ended up with a rolling meet with number 59. Just as we were coming in, he was entering as well. So we didn't quite get our 3rd stabbing of the varnish, as it were, but it was pretty close there. So here we are at approaching the siding at Cable. Here's Cable here. At this point, that's the crew of 59 who has departed that first class passenger train. All right, so now our arrival at Mojave. There's a long stretch of double track that was uneventful, and eventually we got down to Mojave. You can see when we arrived, it was the next day, 12:16 a.m. So we departed at 8:45. So it was a real 3.5-hour journey on this 1-to-1 clock. Here's our registering, and that is the end of our journey. So in summary, we'll go back and look at our goals. Our goals were to hopefully encourage some apprentice model railroaders to learn timetable and train order. Again, by becoming a road crew member on a timetable train order layout, or develop a basic operating scheme at existing layout. As far as the journeyman, become a crew member at a more complex layout. Again, the La Mesa Club is one of the more complex, just because of the train sizes, the distances, and the realism involved. Try to be an operator, or if it's a smaller layout, a dispatcher, or modify your layout to be to have timetable and train order operation. So hopefully at least some of those above goals were achieved. And this includes the eventful and hopefully interesting journey of First 808. I think we're relatively good on our time check.
Yeah, that's great. It's been, geez, I can't remember I've been to that club one time, but just as a outside the glass type visitor, it'd be quite the experience to do. But I've got some questions. I'm just going to go.
Should I stop sharing and go back to my other view here? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Let's see. Why are westward third class and eastward extras? There must be a reason.
Okay, so there may be some other folks on here that I think, again, the rather than having to write all these meet orders for both westward and eastward extras, the Southern Pacific, and it wasn't just over the Tehachapi division. I think near where I live in Simi Valley, the coastline, they would make one direction regular trains, and then they would write the orders, sort of what you saw there. One, you would have the eastward trains they're on the timetable, so they have their authority, and then usually the westward trains are written with orders against them. They found, because in other cases, if you're constantly writing these meet orders against the extras, I think they just found it more convenient to run, especially when they're running multiple sections. You can write orders against 808, and it applies to first 808, second 808, third 808. But as I said, there may be some other experts on here that can answer it better or more correctly than I did.
Well, looking through the comments, there seems to be a conflict. Somebody named Lou says priority on the SP was eastbound. Oh, priority on the SP was eastbound trains, particularly if they were carrying produce. And then Chuck says on the SP, typically westward trains are superior by direction. So that would seem to be in conflict to me.
Yeah, I think I noted what was, I think at least for this subdivision or this division, I hopefully noted it correctly that the westward were superior. I don't know that they universally across all regions and all divisions that was the case, but I think in this particular example, I think I got it right.
Yeah, so let's see. I don't quite understand. When did the 3-hour time ownership of time span change to 12?
I would, Don Mitchell, I see Don Mitchell is on, and again, that's really an error on my part. Most of the prototype, it's 12 hours. Okay, and you have orders, your timetable authority at a given station is good for 12 hours. I think initially, it might have been before I operated. I think that transition, because you get a La Mesa Club rule book that is very close to, I think, the Southern Pacific 1951 rule book, but they had modified a few of the rules, and I think they just found that they wanted to go to the 12 hours. So someone else there might be able to do a better job than I did.
Oh, could you hear me?
Yes, Don.
Stop and think, 3 hours. Your train took longer than 3 hours. We had too many trains dying on the layout.
Yeah. So let's see, Seth Newman said this is a convention of the La Mesa Club. In the real world, there were westward third-class trains also. Cal Sexsmith says, from what I've seen in employee timetables, it was common practice to schedule freights in one direction only for ease of dispatching. I have a 1960 CN employee timetable in front of me right now. It shows eastward fourth class trains departing Bigger, Saskatchewan at 5:20, 12 o'clock, and 20:50, and no westward fourth class trains. So I guess it's just depending on the railroad. So let's see. Steve Hemmel asked, could the 17 cars have been left in the yard or siding until the meets occurred and then picked up? Would that have put 808 in better time?
I think that among the many things I could have done better, I think that was probably one of them. So I think the short answer is yes. And any and all Monday morning quarterbacking is any and all Monday morning quarterbacking is appreciated.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of that. I'm going to skip that. But is it true to life that work orders would allow pickup to generate a train length a known amount exceeding siding capacities?
Well, I would think that call sheet that the crew received, I believe the dispatcher also gets a copy of that. So he would have been able to see that, and I would think that the operator at that location would have also provided a new train length. But really, I never should have left Bina. I should have been waiting at the end of double track for all that Caliente stuff to go on, and then a lot of that would have all the passenger trains, etc. So my misreading of those two westward Southern Pacific extras with the similar numbers, which that's reality, that was a lack of attention to detail on my part. So.
Let's see, there was a discussion about the helpers. It looks like Chuck already answered that. While you're relying on the timetable, are there ever conversations with a dispatcher or communications with depots along the way to resolve issues?
Well, I mean, usually, I mean, I think there is a railroad phone at each siding or at each station. So, and that is the fun part. That in some places the dispatcher really has no easy way to get a hold of you in certain sidings or in certain areas. But the short answer is absolutely. That's one of the mantras of timetable train order. Let them work it out. So the crews get together, the operator is there. So yes, the collective putting your heads together is definitely encouraged, and that was part of that solution that we worked out. And but the operator did not give me that advice to wait on doing my pickup.
Yeah. All right. Please explain the wait until times. Which train does the wait time apply?
I think if we went back and looked at the order, it basically, so again, going back to this eastward third class regular train versus this extra train, the way, and this is very much a style. There are some folks who dispatch at La Mesa that use these right over orders with the wait times, and then others will do the so-called hard meets. But what it does, it allows that westward train to advance against what would have been a superior eastward train. And often these trains on the busy weekends, there'll be 3, 4, 5 sections. So the only way to let these westward extras advance is to give them a right over the regular train. But then, so essentially what you're doing is you're creating a schedule for those westward trains. And that's where the experience of the dispatcher with the railroad, with the traffic patterns, he'll say, well, I'll give him right over, but if I hold him at these couple places, then the other trains can go in and advance on his time. So that is one style of order to allow these opposing trains to work against each other. And personally, I do like those because the hard meet, if one train is late, that, nothing happens there with the right over. Well, I thought I was going to meet at this siding, but I got delayed, so I can meet at this other location. But it's a style and situation dependent.
There's a discussion about TT&TO here. Yes, you said the fast clock was really not a fast clock. It was 1-to-1, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the nice things that you can do. You can look at your watch or your phone and you know what time it is. The only thing that's different is, you show up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and one day it is exactly that time. It is 8 a.m. The next day when you show up, it is 12 hours railroad time later. So it's 8 p.m. And that's the situation we had here. My watch said 8 a.m., but it was really 8 p.m. But you don't have to do any of the math of it's 1-to-1 in real time. So from that standpoint, it gives you a real nice feel for estimating times.
Got it. Tom's asking, I visited the La Mesa Club a couple of times, and they also run modern trains for the public. Do you know how their traffic flow is managed?
I have operated as just on a run session when they're open to the public once. And it is not the one session I was at, it was not that formal. And I guess I might defer that again to Don Mitchell or maybe some of the regular La Mesa Club members to answer that better than I could.
Yeah, Chuck is saying on the public days at La Mesa with no formal operations, trains run as see and be seen. I've done this service 6 times for 6 hours each day. So just pretty much just don't run into the person ahead of you, I suppose. All right. Well, I think that's it for the questions. So Al, thanks so much for presenting. We appreciate it. Hopefully everybody got something out of the presentation. We'll have this recorded and put up later tonight. With that, I'm going to stop the security is turned off. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. Otherwise, we'll wish you well and see you in 2 weeks. So otherwise,
Chuck here. And I can say a little more about those public sessions. The railroad runs with 2 turnaround loops. There's one at West Illman, and there's a second one at Cable. And the trains run back and forth between there, typically 3 or 4 trains with 3 or 4 engineers. When I have done it, we typically had a working rule that if you were coming westbound, say down the hill, and you were heading out toward Illman, you would stop at Caliente and make sure that there's nobody else further down the track in there on that single track going down to Illman. If you were sure that was clear, then you could go on down and do the turnaround loop and come back to Caliente. The trickier parts were when you went from the first floor to the second floor between the cliff siding and the siding up on above the helix at Rowan. You might have to walk up there a little ways and see if there's somebody there and say, okay, John, I'll meet you at Cable or I'll meet you at Woodford and I'll take the siding, or vice versa, just to make sure you don't have 2 trains suddenly come around curves each other on single track with no way to avoid a hit. It worked very well.
thanks, Chuck. Let's see. Tom Kane's asking, how are op sessions picking up around the country? For me, I did one yesterday. Had a good time with that. The pictures are up on the OpSig Facebook page. John Hansky says he's planning to operate the Burlington Southern, his railroad, in July. Anybody else?
Railroad Club, we're doing 2 op sessions a month now.
I had a small op session with just 3 people about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, I had
in Mexico, Missouri, we're starting full-blown sessions May 8th on the Norfolk Southern Purdue District.
Omaha area operators, maybe some of you are familiar with OS Omaha. This was the year for that, usually run in the spring. But we're beginning to talk about maybe holding it the weekend before Halloween in October. So we're just kind of basically starting to put that together possibly. So,
Say, Bill, I know for some reason, I was just having a chat with somebody about that the other day, and for some reason my brain was mixing Omaha and Oklahoma, because there's a convention down in Tulsa right about the same time. I'm like, oh
right,
yeah, that's Omaha. No, wait, that's different state. So
yeah.
OS, that looked like some amazing layouts out in Omaha, Nebraska. I do know where
Right.
it is. So
We've got a few really outstanding ones. Paul DeLuca
Yeah.
is New York Central and that. And with the COVID, these guys have been doing lots of work on their railroads.
yeah.
We're restarting ops on May 8th on the Castle Rock and Pacific for vaccinated operators.
Yep, that's the event we were chatting about that we're planning here for October. Vaccinations are required unless there's an actual, genuine medical thing and not something you read on the internet. So, and we got a lot of interest. I think there's a lot of pent up demand. So.
I'll be going to Comanche, Texas on Tuesday, and we will spend the rest of the week at an 1.5-inch scale railroad, probably 65 of us, totally outdoors for a week.
So, okay, 1.5 inches, is that the, I've done the, what would it be, I guess it'd be the 1/8 scale one where you can actually
Right.
ride on the train. So this is that what you're calling 1.5 inch, or is that the track width?
Yeah, it's a 7.5-inch gauge,
Okay,
and we operate generally timetable train order. We operate with radios and 4-man crews. And if you don't pay attention, you can get yourself badly hurt.
yeah, re-railing those cars is a little bit more work than an HO car.
Well, you ought to try re-railing a 484.
Ooh. Yeah, I did one up in Michigan a few years ago, and they actually had a cement hopper that was filled with cement. So it was that there's a reason you have that many people on the crew. Plus the little cabooses with the automatic brakes make things real nice. But yeah, that's a lot of fun.
That would be the Comanche and Indian Gap Railroad, I believe. And it's a fun time. I've operated there before.
Yeah, we have one here in Indiana or down in Bloomington. He has a outdoor, same the 1/8 scale, 7.5-inch wide track, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a whole different view. When has a little whack the stick signals, and it's very cool. It's a lot of fun.
When you operate there, it gives a whole different meaning to the word stab the passenger train.
This is Doug Gurin with some questions.
Sure, go ahead, Doug.
On a real railroad, newcomers are paired with, old hands to get over the railroad. They don't put, new people in a timetable and train order situation alone, to try and figure things out. Yet it seems fairly common on model railroading to, put a rookie to the railroad out on the line unescorted. So one of the questions is, how do people, follow this practice, or what's the rationale for, putting them out there? And somewhat relatedly, I've had the good fortune to operate on Steve King's layout, and he provides help to the newcomers. For example, he'll highlight in the register the trains that you were supposed to check out to see that they had indeed arrived. And his timetable indicates in boldface where you have meets. So you're on the lookout at those stations, to check everything. He also provided a string diagram, which Al, I don't think mentioned, but for newcomers, at least for me, I find a string diagram showing the scheduled trains and where they meet and the slope of the line and hence their speeds to be, an additional tip. So I wonder if the commenters can, speak to, both the reality of railroaders, not being out on the line naively, and what the owners can do to make the system work more fairly and less stressfully for the people over the road.
Yeah. So you got a couple different situations. So if it's let's say it's like a regional event or something where you've got people coming in who haven't run, let's say there's a TT&TO railroad. Maybe they haven't run on that particular railroad, but they understand TT&TO. That's different than somebody who's never done it before at all. And then, obviously you're going to want to send people out with an assistant. I think in places where, you understand TT&TO and you just don't know the railroad, I think a lot of times there's somebody that you'll pair up with somebody. Somebody will be the engineer, the other one will be the conductor. I guess it just depends on the railroad and if there's room for, if there's room for two people to be working together on the train. But I've seen both personally.
I've been on the Tehachapi layout one time, and the first run I made was with another person, a regular member of the club. They made sure I understood the railroad and got a feel for my skills. And then they put me on a helper, which gave me some fairly low risk experience with it. And then turned me loose, at which point I made a serious mistake trying to back a 50-car train up the grade without a helper. I missed
my experience with this clinic, as I indicated, that was my first time down there, but it was this journey was the second day. And as Doug indicated, the first day on my first run as a road crew, I had a pilot that helped me. Again, I had dispatch timetable and train order on different railroads many times before. I mean, really, I should have known better. I mean, the mistakes that I made, but it's just being in there and the length of the trains and the runs, et cetera. And there is a lot, my NASA customer from the South talks about drinking from a fire hose. And there is a little bit of that when you get all that information, even if you know the physical plant of it or whatever. But I think most places, I think, Eric, you made a right distinction. There's new to operations person. There's an experienced in operations, but new to timetable train order. And then there's just new to the layout. And if it's big enough and you can get in enough trouble, you should have someone pilot you at least the first time around.
Yeah, new to operations and TT&TO are probably not the best combination. That's, you can learn it, but I did a session on sort of an introduction to operations, and TT&TO is sort of let's call it the capstone project. If you understand, okay, this is a signal, this is how you operate on the train, you get permission, you don't move without permission, there's a lot of things before you're really ready to do TT&TO in most cases. As you said, it's the drinking from a fire hose. It's just so much to keep track of, plus being on a layout that you've never been on. And I can only imagine, if it's 6,000 square feet or however big that, I know it's a huge space there. So I can
on the Burlington Southern, what we do is if I know I have a new operator coming, they get sent along with their email, the operator instructions and a map of the layout, and they are teamed up with somebody the first 2 or 3 times, at least the first 2 or 3 trains that they're going to be operating with, and we do TT&TO.
Yeah. Well, like I said, you're not gonna turn somebody loose unless they even somebody who's an experienced TT&TO, they still need to learn your layout. So.
Well, if I could chime in on another example, sure. This was from the roadshow group that did so much to promote timetable and train order. I had a train and I was trying to estimate the run time to the towns ahead of me. And I suppose if I was sharp and I subtracted all the times of the scheduled trains, I could get a rough idea of how to figure out whether I could safely make it. But if I'm a freight train and presumably a slow freight or there's an uphill grade or a variety of other circumstances, how am I supposed to know, something like the runtimes by direction with the motive power I'm assigned if I don't get some help, which may not be prototypical, but it would greatly reduce the stress. I ended up making a string diagram of my own and trying to figure out what to do. And the added complication that they gave me was that I was to depart, but there were 2 other first-class trains on my tail. And I had to kind of figure out how far I could go before they could catch up to me. And I certainly would have appreciated help as a person who'd had a passing introduction to TT&TO before.
Yeah.
Well, I've been involved in several local layouts that were just starting or just introduced TT&TO. And a practical problem is that we didn't have a whole lot of local operators that have ever done this before. So we were all kind of learning together. And, sometimes that's what you have. Of course, the layout that's been operating in TT&TO for some time has a cadre of experienced operators that can help out new people, and it's best if they get paired up.
I guess I was just making the argument for people listening in who have guests or are thinking of setting it up to think of the person who may have had some introduction to TT&TO before, but trying to make it easier or find out what the stress points are and what you might do to ease them either in a prototype manner or in a sort of prototype freelance way of providing additional help, like the run times that Al mentioned that he had gotten.
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that can help with that is just the idea of, I know there are some people who they have their 3 or 4 people that run their layout and that's it. They never let anybody else come play. Like that, that's their right. But I think if you have other people come in, sometimes you can learn from them and say, hey, what if we did X, Y, Z here? Or, hey, I had a question about this. This wasn't clear. It's the idea that we want to get more people into this niche of the niche that we of model railroading. And I think your comments are right on the money. You need to be able to, it should be reasonably easy to explain how to run your railroad, and whether that's helper guides like John was showing, if it's something you send early, as Ken said, Bruce Chubb sends 34 pages of pre-operations instructions for his Sunset Valley Railroad. And having been there, I was still overwhelmed. And I've run railroads all over the place, and that one, the places where it's like 4 decks of railroading, it's overwhelming no matter who you are. So,
and the fun part about Bruce is there are probably about 8 different routes that you can take, and you only get the veteran on the first one, right, and then the rest of it you're on your own.
Right, you got that little snippet that you're running, and it has nothing to do with the rest. It was just, it was amazing railroad. I'd love to do it again. But
I have a question for Don Mitchell if he's still on. I understood that the prototype on this stretch of railroad was CTC, not timetable and train order. How do they square if that's indeed the case, how do they square operating in a prototype manner on a railroad that actually ran because of the traffic density with CTC?
If Don's not there, let me take a shot at that, because I actually started writing an article about it until we discovered that some of the records had been destroyed in a fire at the Bakersfield Tower in, I think, the 60s. In reality, free range, if you want to call it that, timetable and train order, where the crews figured out their own meets, was gone by sometime in 1929, around June or July. So in fact, in the 1953 era that Tehachapi's sessions are set, it's very unlikely there were very few people operating who'd actually run under free range TT&TO. In 29, they put in a series of remote signals and switches controlled by the operators at the main stations, the ones that are modeled on La Mesa. So they were operated essentially as towers. And when the operator would call the dispatcher and say, coming east, he would be told it's extra, 3259 east, put him in the siding or keep him on the main. And the crew really didn't make that decision at all. By the middle of 1943, during World War II, to avoid the immense expense and engineering of trying to double track it, the feds funded CTC. So you're quite right. By 1953, it hadn't been run that way for, 20-something years. But basically, a lot of great operators in the club wanted to run timetable and train order. And, they do. Now, the layout, if you look at it, is signaled. So clearly CTC triads would be, wouldn't be there if you were really running a dark railroad. So this is just I think an extremely successful attempt to use a very accurate 1953 model of a railroad as a board game for TT&TO, more or less as practiced in the Roaring 20s, which is why they went to the towers at the end of the 20s because of the increased traffic.
There's a seldom talked about form of CTC, Seth, which maybe you can elaborate on, which was called manual traffic control, where the dispatcher controlled signals at the approach to the turnouts or meet spots. And the crews were to manually work the turnouts as indicated by the indications of the signals. And so it was called poor man's traffic control. It's
or poor man's
about,
CTC. My prototype, the Western Pacific first sub, I operated as the occupied Western Pacific because it's really the UP in 1999. Had that on the first sub, which is actually the part of the WPI model, and the Midwestern modelers are probably familiar with a Monon, which used this rather famously. It would never have been used on a railroad like Tehachapi with 70, 80, 100 trains a day. But there was a certain level of traffic, like post-war, typically more than about 12 trains a day, including passengers, where you would start to signal. And some of those railroads found the efficiency of being able to use the signals to tell the crews when to take siding was valuable. But power switches, as you point out, were very expensive. So a lot of these, less wealthy railroads would use these take siding switches. And, so it was a poor man's CTC. There were some interesting wrinkles. The WP, for example, had unbonded siding. So there was no detection of the siding. There was a little switch on the board that the dispatcher would throw to remind himself of the status. And Tommy Holt in the Austin area actually models that. And I had the opportunity to dispatch it a couple of times. Fantastic also. So I mean, I think the answer to both of these questions from a modeling perspective is, sometimes we force the prototype to do things to make it a little bit more fun and to force a little more traffic through. That's also why La Mesa has a lot more non-clearing trains without just fleeting. The SP, when it got really busy, would simply run one way for 6 hours and then let the railroad clear out, let the locals do some work and run the other way for 6 hours. But then you don't have to deal with the issues of all the meets that, as Al explained, is very challenging and an awful lot of fun. So, we made a choice for operating play value. And I think it's been incredibly successful.
CSX had CTC on the Andrews sub between Hamlet and Dillon. And they had unbonded sidings until after the most recent turn of the century.
Wow. Yeah, they went away actually in 2003 on the UP XWP first sub. Yeah. It's the Oakland sub now.
So when you got a signal to take siding, the aspect would be restricted proceed.
Do you think that the sheer size of the La Mesa layout lends itself to timetable better than some other railroads? Okay. Okay.
Not so much just the size, Tom, but the number of train lengths between sidings. If you've only got, 2 train lengths between sidings, a lot of rules almost never come into play, particularly having to do with certain signaling systems used for the intermediates. But the nice thing about La Mesa is the train speed's relatively low because it's a 25-mile-an-hour mountain railroad. And it's typically 6 trains between sidings, which is close to the prototype. And there's lots of time for things to develop. So you can write a complex order like, right over with weight ats and get those distributed and actually make things happen in something like real time for the prototype. And I think that adds to the incredible challenge of running that railroad.
Yeah, having done you're talking about TT&TO, having done the exercise for the NMRA achievement for dispatcher of trying to build a straight diagram for my layout. I'm like, it's 200 feet of main line. How complicated can you get? It's like, okay, sure, it's going to take a half hour to get from here to here. I'm like, no, it takes about 5 minutes to get from here to here. It's
exactly.
It just gets very silly, as opposed to somewhere like that where, or like the old, for anybody up near Chicago, the Batavia Club was, that one was a monster too. We went there when I was a student at Purdue, and it took several hours to get from one end to the other, and we were by ourselves. It was just that big. So
I have another question to ask the experts on the show. Books written around the 1940s, maybe even in the 50s, talk about the use of 31 orders, which is, stop and sign for, and the crew talk over the receipt of those 31 orders. Yet model railroading, as I understand almost everywhere on the train order setups, is they only use 19 orders, and they don't try and simulate the stop rituals or protocols. Does anybody online now know about the history of 31 orders and when that practice really phased out, either for a particular railroad or, in general within the industry?
Well, let me take another shot at that one. So the issue, one of the main issues is that trains are in the 20s are getting longer and heavier. And the amount of time it takes for a train to slow down, get in the siding, and then get restarted becomes very significant. So the railroads start handing more and more orders up on the fly till by the end of TT&TO, and actually by the transition era, generally you never got a 31, a stop and sign for it order, except where a superior train was getting an order being restricted at the point of restriction. So in other words, if I'm traveling from Anna to Gerda, and I have a meet at Clara, and I'm told, no, I want to give you the meet at Bess. Well, I should have moved it one further west, but you get the point. Unless I am telling you, now you're going to meet at Bess instead of Clara, and I've already passed Anna, so there's no opportunity to give you an order. In that case, I would give you a 31 to ensure that you didn't pass the station. But in no other case would you ever get a 31 to stop and sign. SP, getting this back to La Mesa and Al's example, had gotten rid of the distinction between 19 and 31 sometime, I believe, before World War II. The number that sticks in my head is 38, but I could be wrong. Simply because it was a mountain railroad and they didn't want to stop trains unnecessarily. And they had some other mechanisms to make that safe, but yeah, 19, the distinction between 19 and 21 also doesn't make much sense on a model railroad because it's hard to write while you're walking and following your train. So generally we stop and write it anyway. So really all of our orders are 31s, but anyway.
The Southern Railway in the 1970s no longer had a Form 31 train order at all. But there were provisions in the rules where if a train was being restricted at the point where it got the order, you would say that on the order.
Right.
And that order would have to be signed by the crew of the superior train before it could be made complete.
Right, right. So it would be, 2341 East gets this at Caliente. And
Right.
again, you would stop and sign. So the effect was the same as the old 31, but generally they didn't do them.
Right. There was no more Form 31 by then. So it was all on Form 19s. But
I guess the reason I mentioned it is because my first introduction to it was books Let's Operate a Railroad by A.C. Kalmbach, who was writing in the 40s. And there were a couple of other things that I had read around that time. So I think you're right, as the trains got heavier, the stopping thing became a matter. But on a lot of the railroads, perhaps with older steam engines, where they had a limited train length because of the engines involved and not certainly multiple unit diesels. I just wonder, for the listeners about paying attention to what their own prototypes did, because there may be some play value to stopping a train and having it sign the order and talk with the other crew member about what to do in a prototype kind of manner.
Well,
So,
on La
Doug,
Mesa,
there's
when they
one-
do these orders with the extra words, extra 1, 2, 3 West gets this order at Caliente, that order is usually given to several trains, and the opposing trains can use that as a heads up to themselves to be on the lookout that this guy that is meeting is supposed to get it at this particular station, but maybe he missed it. So watch out that you might run into him coming the other direction without having actually read that order.
Cough, cough, Al, cough, cough.
Yeah. That's another thing they do to add to the play value.
well, on the particular section of the Southern that I'm modeling, many of the train order offices were not at locations where there were sidings, and many of the sidings did not have train order offices, which, provided I ever get this bloody thing built, may get us into some interesting situations.
Yeah, I would just comment that as a TT&TO dispatcher myself, I really don't like to issue orders to do things at blind sidings. In other words, sidings that have no office, because if things change, you're stuck, and then you have to send an order out in care of, or just cheat and walk out on the layout and hand out some orders. So that kind of suspends disbelief when you have to do that.
Well, is the Casey Jones story based on trying to beat a time level, or because someone missed track of where a train was at?
I think it was a miss.
There's a mistake then.
Yes, they just missed something. He was considered to be a fast runner, but I think the problem was a torpedo was not heard or didn't fire or something like that. There was a flagman out there, and if it had been observed, he would have slowed to the point where the damage would have been pretty minimal. If you look around on the web, you can find the accident report.
One thing about the TT&TO that I've found, we talk about play value. I found that on the BS line, we're going to signals. I'm signaling it mainly because there's a lot of operators, and I operate 25 people, and that's a lot for a home layout, where they miss it. They don't understand the order, and I've tried for 4 or 5 years with the same people to say, well, this means this. And then when you only operate every 3 months or so, people, they just forget. So I think the the timetable and train order is just a lot of work. And it's fun, but to relieve my homework, I'm going to signals. It's just an awful lot to write up these orders, and we run the same schedule every time, and it's the same orders. But when you got like 25 people, they don't always get the same orders. They don't understand them. And it really stops the whole session when you have to, explain things 3 or 4 times. So that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Sometimes if you've got someone who's inattentive, they're going to be inattentive reading or looking at lights. So some people, it doesn't matter. They're going to be bad regardless of the system. But more people should be able to observe the signals. And, one thought would be if you go to the signaling, that doesn't mean you can't have a dark session. We have a layout in Southern California that is fully signaled, but Bruce Morden is was the superintendent of Gary Siegel's layout. It was in MR in April of '96, I think. And there's times when we run it dark. So going to signals doesn't preclude you having an occasional session the other way. It just gives you more of the flexibility. So that's something to think about as well.
I've actually thought about implementing positive train control. So if you run a red signal, you're going to be throwing a tortoise, which is going to kill the track in front of you, and then everybody's going to say, "What happened?"
Got to douse a bucket of water on them too, though.
And I run a layout where I was serving as the train master on a layout that had part of it was CTC, was SP division, Shasta division with the target signals.
Right.
And we were short of crews, so I went in and was going to serve as the helper engineer out of Dunsmuir. But the regular engineer asked if I would switch positions with him because he told me he was colorblind and he wouldn't be able to read the target signals. He would just follow my lead then as the helper engineer.
Oh, because it's target, yeah. I operate the Siskiyou line, so yeah, I've got reason to signal it. One thing I don't need though is a yellow signal because they don't go fast enough to go beyond restricted speed anyway.
Well, it seems like warrants would be a good way to take away some of the decision making of the crew and help them out by telling them yes, go or no go without putting in the signals.
Well, I do have a timetable, and they are to look at the train register. Excuse me, even with the signals. It just takes a lot to train people. I had one person who it was on that group that Doug was talking about, and he was complaining that a certain E8 wouldn't go around a curve. And I looked, well, he is way beyond where he's supposed to stop. And this is supposedly somebody who does who gives demonstrations for OPSIG about how to operate a model railroad. So everybody can make a mistake. It's just easier to try to head them off so you don't have rampant confusion throughout the whole operating session.
When you say you're going to put in, excuse me, when you say
we run CTC, and we had an operator who would see a red signal and look beyond it, and if he didn't see anybody coming, he'd say, well, the dispatcher made a mistake and didn't set my signal. I'll keep going.
Rule number 2, dispatcher does not ever make a mistake.
Yeah, he doesn't come here anymore.
So we have a person that comes to that big layout that I manage out in Southern California. And when we first did timetable and train order, he was aghast that we would run without the signals. And it worked fine, but he didn't like it, so he didn't come back. But odd thing about it is that when we had the signals, as soon as he came up to a red signal, he'd call the dispatcher and say, I'm sitting here at a red signal. And we got some really good dispatchers that just would say to him, yep, you are. And then leave him sitting there for a long time just because he's a pain in the butt. So, you know,
We're
it can
all
work
human.
both ways. Now, the
Yeah.
other thing about Southern Pacific, and I was going to jump in here because you had the big long discussion about eastbound and westbound. They have this really strange feeling about themselves. Headquarters was in San Francisco,
Right.
and westbound was always towards San Francisco. Even if you were in Portland and you were headed south geographically, that was westbound because you were going for headquarters. And the westbound traffic was always superior. Almost always. There were some exceptions, but
Yeah.
almost always westbound was superior. And even with timetable and train order on the Southern Pacific, they had ABS signals in a lot of places. So the trains could see if there was somebody in the blocks ahead, but it didn't matter. They had semaphore signals set up for ABS long before they had any kind of track warrants. I did the presentation on the direct traffic control, and that's what Southern Pacific went to. And then when UP took over, then they went to track warrants. So there is an evolution of traffic control from timetable and train order to CTC. And my way of thinking, and Al did a great job of telling us how he managed down at Tehachapi, but the crews really have to think. In CTC, they don't have to think. All they have to know is red light, green light, and just move across the railroad.
One
Well,
of the more
the Atlantic coastline and the Seaboard Airline and later Seaboard Coastline was similar, except that the city was Richmond. And if you were going towards Richmond, you were going north, regardless of which compass direction you were actually traveling.
one of the more interesting conversations I had with Mike Burgett about CTC dealt with making CTC train running interesting, because some people, including myself, after you've run a train over the line with CTC a couple of times, it can get boring unless there's some variation or some challenge thrown in. And he said, well, it doesn't have to be boring. And then he proceeded to give me, a couple of ideas, of how you can enhance operations on CTC so as to minimize the boredom effect. He also commented the C&O put in what he called poor man's CTC in one direction and the real McCoy in the other direction, which was a distinction I'd not read about in the model railroad literature.
We like to use CTC because it's easy. We like to have newbie operators come with no experience and expose them to the fun of operations. And CTC makes that pretty easy, like for through freights or passenger trains that don't have any switching. No switching to do, and eventually they graduate to the ability to run locals and become good operators.
Well, I've got my dispatchers have the ability to give local control for local freights, and he also has to notify, it's on the timetable too, but he has to notify the through freights or anybody coming through that this guy is working in that area. The locals are still responsible for clearing. They basically have a track warrant and time, I guess, but they have to keep looking at the timetable to be out of the way of all superior trains. We run about 47 trains during an operating session, and there's been numerous times when somebody will say, hey, I've got the right to be here, and they'll look at the timetable and say, oh, I didn't have the right to be here. And then we all laugh, and that guy gets placed at the last of the lunch line.
So you've stopped doing the beatings after the railroad now, or the session?
Well, the beatings will continue until attitude improves and morale improves.
Excellent. That's the right plan. So, all right. Well, it's been a great discussion. I think we'll go ahead and shut her down now.